welcome. Welcome to the first Sunday of the Triodion, the Sunday of the Publican and the Pharisee. The 3 weeks prior to Lent, called the period of the Triodion, signal to us that we are approaching Great and Holy Lent. These weeks prepare us to begin our Lenten journey. If you like to bake, this period before Great Lent is like making sure you have all the ingredients and set them out before you start. If you like baseball or sports, this period is spring training or the preseason. Or if you're like me and have a house full of children, this period is like packing up the car before you start off on a road trip as a family. It is a time for preparation for a journey, a unique kind of journey. And in these weeks, we are invited to reflect on what Lent is really about, to put ourselves in the right mindset for our journey to Pascha, and to prepare. When we think about Great Lent, we might be tempted to think about Lent as a time of giving things up, giving up all these things we might enjoy in life. We think most often about fasting, giving up those great foods we like to eat. Maybe it means more church services or longer church services. With this understanding, we might be thinking, uh-oh, Lent is almost here. That is a misunderstanding of the nature of this season. A friend of mine went with his wife and 2 young children to a nice resort for a weekend. They saved up to be able to afford this expensive vacation. When he returned, he told me about his first morning there. The family came down to breakfast and saw the most fantastic breakfast buffet. There were all different types of breads, rolls, croissants, and then the pastries, danishes, and an array of muffins. They had all sorts of meats that you didn't even know the names of, and an omelet bar with 20 different toppings, all sorts of fruit juices to choose from, an espresso bar, and a whole table just with all different types of fruits to choose from, and yogurts and a waffle station with so many different toppings. He went on and on. And his 2 sons, he told me, walked through the breakfast buffet, made their way to the cereals, and poured themselves a bowl of Captain Crunch cereal and went to sit and eat, much to their parents' dismay. They passed up an entire feast to have cold sugar cereal that they could eat at home. That is like Great Lent. This is a time of the year that God offers us a feast, a buffet of nourishment for our souls, our inner lives, and invites us to take as much of this feast as we desire and feed our souls. St. Athanasius writes, "To fast is to banquet with the angels." Lent is not about giving up good things, but it's a time to refocus our lives on the truly good and the truly nourishing and life-giving things for our souls. It's easy and natural to find ourselves busied with the business and the busyness of life. And our days get filled with going to work, earning money, paying bills, or saving our money, or going to school and thinking about our future, or getting our kids to school, planning our lives, the shopping, the doctors, the dentists, the meetings, the appointments. Many of the things that fill our time are important things and good things. But it's easy in the midst of the many things for us to neglect internal things and eternal things. And when we take a break from all these things, the breaks we take might be watching a movie or a series, or playing video games, checking out on social media or the news. And when we have a down moment in our day and need a break, we might find ourselves mindlessly scrolling on our cell phones. We all know that these types of things don't, in fact, leave us better off. It's easy for our lives to become filled with and focused on all these external, physical, and material aspects of our lives. And what gets lost too often is our inner life, our soul. And we find ourselves today living in a wealthy country, at a wealthy time, with most of us living comfortably. Yet we see how too many of us suffer from a type of spiritual malnutrition, struggling with loneliness, boredom, feelings of emptiness, and increasing rates of depression and anxiety. we are a strikingly wealthy country, but also for too many, not very happy, with lots of evidence of a type of spiritual poverty of the soul. Because we are not created to be filled by distractions and material things. We were created for intimacy with God and one another. We were created for our souls to be nourished in the love of God, which sustains and fills all our relationships. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Matthew 5:6. It's easy to go through life distracted by all the things of our world and lose sight of our inner life, to slowly starve our souls. Removing ourselves as human beings from a deep spiritual life is like taking a fish out of water. They can't survive outside their natural environment. St. Isaac of Nineveh writes, "The insatiable longing of the soul for the acquisition of virtue surpasses the desire of its partner, the body, for visible things." Virtue is natural to our souls. Intimacy and closeness to God is our natural state. We are created to thrive in relationships of love with God as the source. Great Lent is a time to return to our natural state, writes Father Alexander Schmemann in his classic work, Great Lent. But we can't see our souls, and it's easy to think that all this spiritual stuff is just religious stuff, not connected to real life. And we can feel the pressures of getting ahead in the world, or maybe just getting by. And we live in a world that ignores God and ignores the soul, or denies they even exist. So it can seem strange to live in a way that focuses on nourishing our souls. This is a time that we are invited to reflect on what is really good, what really strengthens and restores us as human beings. What is the path of genuine happiness? And that is a life in Christ, a life of faith and closeness to God. This time is a time to prepare, to make a plan for Great Lent, to look at what God is offering to us at this banquet, and reflect on the focus of our lives, how we spend our time, our energy, our money, and how we can adjust our lives, our routines, and attend more intentionally to our inner lives and our intimacy with God. It is a time to talk to our spiritual father or spiritual mother or your priest for guidance on how to turn away from the demands and distractions of daily life and how to replace these things with nourishment for our souls. We are offered things like fasting, worship services, confession, almsgiving, and serving the poor, among an array of things prescribed for this season. It might mean if you generally rest at the end of the night to a movie or a series or a screen of some sort, maybe you replace that with, for example, going to a Lenten service and standing in worship, or reading about Great Lent, or the upcoming Sunday of Lent, or the life of a saint or the Scriptures. The fathers of the Church knew nothing of cell phones, social media, or binge watching, but they knew exactly what our souls needed to thrive and the dangers of distractions. St. John Chrysostom writes, "Let not the mouth only fast, but also the eye and the feet and the hands and all members of our bodies." Lent is a time when we can take a step toward deepening our quiet prayer time. So maybe the first thing we do when we wake up during Lent is not reach for our cell phone, but make the sign of the cross and venerate an icon, or deepening our morning prayer. This Sunday of the Publican and the Pharisee, Christ himself teaches us through a parable what we are aiming for with all these Lenten practices, what it means to succeed in our Lenten journey. We might be tempted, if we embrace God's invitation this Lent, to try our best to immerse ourselves in all the Lenten offerings. This is good, but successfully accomplishing external practices, Christ reveals, is not in fact our goal. Christ shares a parable, which we read in the Gospel of Luke, of two men who go up into the temple to pray. The first, a religious leader, a Pharisee, prays to himself, Christ says, and lists how successful he is at fulfilling all the religious requirements. And he looks down upon those who don't follow the rules, like the second man who remains in the back of the temple. The second man, the publican, unable to even lift his head, only says, "God, be merciful upon me, a sinner." The Pharisee, Christ teaches, is self-righteous in his success. He is self-sufficient. He is successful and has a heart that is closed to God's grace and love of his neighbor. He is spiritually blinded by his own pride and completely unaware of his need for God. And evidence of his blindness is his judgment of the publican in the back of the church. We judge others and look down on others only when we are blind to our own need for God's mercy and grace. And this pride and spiritual blindness, hidden beneath doing all the right things, actually cuts him off from God and from others. He is essentially alone. Christ reveals that this, in fact, is not success, but failure. While the publican, a tax collector, known to be a criminal, comes before God completely unaware, completely aware of how he has messed up. He hasn't done anything right, but he can see clearly. He is not blinded by pride, and he clearly sees his need for God's mercy and grace. He expresses a heart that is acutely aware of his total dependence on God and his mercy. We hear in his words, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner," echoes of the Jesus prayer within our tradition. It seems, according to Christ, that success in our Lenten journey, success in our spiritual life, and the purpose of all these practices that are available to us is to acquire a heart that is aware of our dependence on God and his mercy and his grace. And that heart of the publican is open to God's healing grace. Psalm 50, we read, "A broken and contrite heart God will not despise." The Lenten journey to Pascha is a journey of changing our external practices that we might see clearly internally our inherent need for God's mercy and love. It's hard to love our neighbor, our siblings, our spouse, or a stranger, or our enemies. Yes. And the more we learn that this is the path of fullness of life and try and walk this path, the more we become aware of our need for God to intervene in our hearts. And we are invited to acquire this spiritual sight by embracing the Lenten practices and connecting the life of Christ, his church, to our homes and our hearts. St. Macarius of Optina writes, "Special services, special foods, self-control, not going to dances and events, all this awakens one to piety and reflection on our present purpose, on the past, and on eternity." St. Maximus the Confessor writes, "Fasting and vigils, prayer and psalmody, acts of charity and hospitality are by nature good, but when performed for the sake of self-esteem, they are not good." This is why it is customary as Orthodox Christians to be private about our fasting and Lenten practices, and to make every effort not to notice what other people are or are not doing. If we accept this invitation to embrace this Lenten journey, we might become aware of how much we actually do notice what everyone is doing. That is good, and Christ gives us the answer this week. We turn to God and ask for his mercy on us. "God, remember me a sinner." Christ proclaims that it is the heart of the publican that we are called to acquire through engaging in the external practices of the Pharisee. Lent is a journey of recognizing our need for God, our natural dependency on God, as the source of life, as the source of strength, and as the source of love. This is our orientation as we begin to prepare for the banquet of Great and Holy Lent. It can be a real struggle to reorient ourselves to our inner lives toward Christ, and we, as the faculty of Holy Cross, cannot change that fact. It can be a struggle. But there is a greater struggle than struggling to turn our lives toward Christ. And that is the struggle of living our lives disconnected from God as the source of life. The struggle of living without spiritual nourishment. What we can do as the faculty is journey with you each week with short reflections on the Sunday of this season. May God strengthen and enlighten each of us to open our hearts and embrace this season, that we may open our hearts to God's healing and grace in anticipation of His glorious resurrection.